And welcome back to the show. Next Gen Men is a not-for-profit organization redefining what it means to be a man by promoting positive masculinities, as well as healthy relationships and gender equity in schools, communities, and workplaces. Next Gen Men creates spaces to engage and educate and empower boys and men around gender and equality. Their work helps build emotional intelligence, as well as giving youth the skills and resilience they need for healthy relationships as well as positive mental health. The youth program also follows the pillars of self-health as well as others. Joining me now to share their point of view on this matter, I am joined by the Executive Director of Next Gen Men, Jake Stika, and we thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
It's going all right. The pandemic definitely threw us for a loop, but the hustle goes on.
Yeah, well, we're making lemons out of lemonade is what they or making lemonade out of lemons, I should say, and that's what all of us are trying to do. But talk to me about uh, reaching young men because obviously your organization really deals with that, and it deals with gender as well as gender equity. But for somebody who can know more about Next Gen Men, share with us.
Yeah, of course. So, I think in terms of kind of the origin story, I like to use the Spider-Man metaphor. When the spider bit you. Um, I'm an incredibly privileged individual. I'm a tall, straight white male, and despite all that, and being a varsity athlete in my late teens and early 20s, I struggled with depression. And at 19, my coping mechanism was binge drinking and partying, and ended up flunking out of the first school I went to. And then at 22, I bounced back. I was, all academic athlete, honor roll. Life should have been great at that point in time, and I'm still miserable. And really coming to understand this masculine script of you got to be tough, you can't show emotion, you can't ask for help. And it wasn't even anything that anyone was putting on me. It was all internal dialogue, which goes to show how strong that culture is that we're swimming in. And so I'm struggling with this. And meanwhile, my best friend, Jamal, who's one of my co-founders at Next Gen Men, unfortunately lost his 13-year-old brother to suicide in 2007. And we think it was due to homophobic bullying and being a young Black youth, that's extra difficult. And so we really just wanted to intervene, to role model new possibilities of what it means to be a man, specifically in and around that 12 to 14-year-old age group, as you're losing your innocence of boyhood and starting to act like what you think it means to be a man, which unfortunately in society is often around, power and domination, competition. And so we wanted to role model through that.
And when you talk about looking at role models and finding positive role models, you're trying to provide an avenue where you can have positive role models, have positive discussion as it pertains to young men. What is it that we can feel, did you feel, will bridge the gap in the lives of these young men, particularly when it comes to the issue of gender?
I think under the banner of feminism over the last 70 plus years, we've had a really rich conversation about women's roles and identities in society. And then obviously, trans and non-binary identities have kind of come a far way as well too. And we've been pushing that gas pedal, but simultaneously pressing the brake with men and boys, right? Because we haven't been having that same conversation. So we're kind of spinning our tires right now. And so how can we have that conversation to create these new possibilities for men and boys to transform their roles and identities from the ones that their fathers and their grandfathers had, so that they can thrive in this new society that we're working towards? I think that's really where we're at. And I have a lot of hope for that next generation because, comparing myself when I was 12 to 14 to them, I was a knucklehead. They know way more than I know. And, all they need right now is just people who give them permission to stay open-hearted and open-minded.
And when we say being permission givers, you're a permission giver because you're helping them to actually say it's okay to be this, it's okay to feel this. Talk to us about the struggle, because you talked about your co-founder and the struggles that that his brother had. Talk to us a little bit about the struggles and how you're able to give people permission to be all right with struggle and at the same time empower them as well.
Totally. it kind of goes down to our vision statement. We're working towards a future where men and boys feel less pain and cause less harm. And the origin and where that really sparked for me was from Bell Hooks' book, Will to Change. I'm going to paraphrase, but there's a quote in there that says, essentially, the first act of violence that men and boys commit is not that against women, but that against themselves. And should they fail to emotionally and psychologically cripple themselves, they will be met by a group of men that will do it for them. Right.
Mm.
And so I think a lot of men can see themselves in that. Right. And when we look at, rising rates of violence and inequality and those kinds of things, it's often hurt people that hurt people. And so how can we lead with empathy for the harm that men and boys experience in patriarchy, but also follow with accountability for the harms that they then cause to others, right? And I think that's the struggle where, on the one hand, you have quote unquote men's rights activists and all that stuff, like, people who are saying, oh, we're being marginalized now and whatnot. And they feel the pain and the harm of patriarchy, but they don't have the words for it, and they haven't arrived to kind of that framework around it. And then on the other hand, there's people who, treat men as pariahs and they're up to no good and those kinds of things. And there's that accountability piece. But how do we build that bridge between that image of like, yeah, men and boys are harmed within the patriarchal system, and we hold them accountable for the harms that they commit?
So when we talk about the power of mentorship, I think that's one of the things that help out in this whole dynamic, right? You have to have positive mentors. So give me a little bit about the mentorship component, what you found that to be like, and how it's actually benefited the youth that you're serving.
Going back to that idea of being a permission giver, right? Like in that moment, we've created so many girls empowerment programs, but often boys are left with just sports. And and that's an oversimplification on my part too, but let's play with it a little bit. But when you have those mentors who are maybe not your father, maybe you had a father figure at home, maybe you didn't, maybe you get a coach, maybe you have a teacher, or those kinds of things. Are those men reinforcing those patriarchal and traditional masculine norms? Or are they giving you permission to see new possibilities? Are they leading with vulnerability? Are they comfortable around people of different sexualities? Are they treating women and girls with respect? Are they using inclusive language? Are they creating space for others, right? And that's really, I think, the power of role modeling, because the more multiple masculinities that you can see, the less likely you are to subscribe to this one that, media and pop culture is pushing towards us of, the fast cars, the sexy women, those kinds of things. And you can see, hey, I don't need to be that or like push myself into this man box. There's other ways that I can manifest in the world.
How do you deal with the issue of vulnerability amongst the young people? Because we know that as men, we're not always the most vulnerable people, right?
Well, it's a bit different during the pandemic, but like there's a great example from our youth programs in the before times. You see women coming together and they're like, oh my God, your hair, like it looks so good, right? They just pay each other compliments right away. And guys rarely ever do that, right? And so in our youth program, we have snacks. And in order to get the snack, you have to pay another participant a compliment. And in the beginning of the program, it's always like, yeah, man, I like your shoes, right? But then as we go through this journey together and we're building capacity in them, it's like, hey, man, I really appreciated earlier in class when you had my back in and around this thing, right? And so, showing them that, paying a guy a compliment or, being vulnerable and sharing an emotion isn't going to result in like, that's weakness, let's get them, but like, that's actually building connection and bonds and those kinds of things.
Yeah. So how do you go about attracting the young men to your program?
That's been a struggle a little bit through the pandemic. I'm going to use a really dramatic word. I don't necessarily mean it, but we got deplatformed because our platform was the school boards, right? So administrators, educators would say, hey, we need the Next Gen Men program in our school, and we'd come and do it. And in Canada, where we do a lot of our work, there's been lots of, rotating school closures. I think in New York, it's probably been similar as well, too. And so the school board is just committed to keeping their kids educated and healthy, and all the power to them. But, you know, how do we reach the youth through this? How do we add value when we can't necessarily be with them? So we pivoted onto a platform called Discord. I don't know if the viewers know that, but it's predominantly a video game chat platform. And so if we're going to be working with 12 to 14-year-old boys, we better be on a video game chat platform. And last summer, we built a digital summer camp on that. And that's kind of continued through the school year, what we call NGM Boys Club, where we create space for them to have social connection because many of them are isolated at home through the lockdowns. Mental health support, just checking in with them, making sure that they're doing okay, taking care of themselves, as well as like a little bit of academic support, not in the sense of like tutoring or anything like that, but like, oh yeah, online school sucks. Like, let's make sure we get our stuff done, right? And so really just building a space, and that's been really exciting because, you know, we got kids from California to Massachusetts to across Canada because, you know, online there's no borders, which is pretty sweet. Silver lining.
Yeah. When I use the term equity leaders, what does that mean to you?
Equity Leaders is our workplace facing arm. So, you know, nonprofit charity is a really tough business model. And we know that a way that, you know, when we're talking about engaging, educating, and empowering around gender inequality, that's a huge gap in corporate spaces, right? Like if you ask a lot of corporate leaders, what is the number one gap to, you know, achieving equity, closing the wage gap, getting representation, those kinds of things, many people will say it's, you know, the male pale and the stale, right? And so how do we get in those spaces and work with those individuals who see equity work or equality work as a potential loss to them and reframe it as, what do you gain, right? Like, do you gain better mental health? Do you gain better relationships? Do you gain more respect with these inclusive practices? And so, you know, there's the broad field of diversity and inclusion, but Equity Leaders really specializes in working in male-dominated workplaces, finance, tech, resource extraction, construction, and bringing these conversations that those guys need to have into those spaces.
How hard is it having these conversations? I mean, breaking through the door with some men could be, you know, we're very masculine and we're very rough and tough. And you've said it before, that vulnerability is not always there. How long does it take to develop that where we can actually get past the surface and really delve into some real serious stuff?
You know, at the root of things, I think a lot of us always have this question of what's in it for me, right? And a lot of the conversation is positioned as these other people need these things, right? So I often talk about, you know, how many executives do we know that are on their second marriage, their kids hate them, and they're one bad day away from a heart attack, right? Like, is that healthy masculinity? Is that what you want to like aspire to be? Your bank account might look nice, but are you happy? Are you fulfilled? And, you know, amongst suicide rates, the number one, we know men are 3 out of 4 suicides. The number one age range is 55 to 65. And it's because a lot of men are suffering divorce, job loss, identity crisis in and around that age. And so when we look at that, it's like, you know, how are we harming ourselves, pushing ourselves to these ideals? And how can we do that better? And then everyone else benefits for that as well, too, as we kind of deal with our own stuff.
Yeah. So if people want to get connected, how do they go about being a part of Next Gen Men?
Yeah, on all the social media, we're at Next Gen Men, even Facebook, which I had to like go back and forth with a church in Atlanta for a couple of years to get that handle. So I'm pretty stoked about that. But on the website, you can check us out at www.nextgenmen.ca.
And so when you talk about the work, what do you see things going? I mean, the summer's going to be here. You're saying there's some challenges with the school system. How do you see things rolling out for you going forward in the summer?
You know, I'm really excited that we have vaccines and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm uncertain that we'll be able to pull it off before the summer. So I think we're going to be doing a digital summer camp again. So if anyone's interested in, you know, creating a positive space online, I know there's the question of screen time, and a lot of parents are probably, you know, not thrilled that their boys are spending that much time, but I think it's what you're doing with that screen time, right? Are you doing a first person shooter, or are you taking part in a positive boys club? So, you know, that'll be out there. But yeah, we're just, you know, I told the team when the pandemic came that, you know, positive masculinities, healthy relationships, mental wellness, gender equity, they're not going away, right? Those are things that society needs. The only way that we fail is if we're overly committed to one way of doing it. So let's get creative and let's find new ways to put it out there.
Yeah. And so if people want more information, of course, they can get in touch with Next Gen Men as the summer continues to come. The digital virtual learning platform will be available. But let me ask this before we close. Out of all of the things that you offer young people, what is it that they most gravitate to within your program?
The space to be seen and heard, I think, right? Like, we live in a culture where, we kind of shake our heads and say, oh, teenagers, right? But they have these like complex internal lives that they're grappling with, and just having a space to kind of put that out there and have someone affirm them and walk them through that, and make them know that, no matter what's going on at home or at school or whatever, that they're seen and they're heard, I think is probably one of the biggest value adds we can give them.
Well, Jake, I want to thank you for taking the time and being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. Continue the great work that you're doing, and hopefully as summer progresses, we'll see some more young men who will take part and then also potentially be transformed. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Thanks so much, Daren.
All righty. Listen, we're taking a quick break. We've got more on the Social Justice Forums. We're returning right after this.